Hey Cinemas Fire, so the last couple of videos that I made were a little bit more advanced than what I would usually do. I learned a lot by making them, and I'm glad that I made them, but for this video I just wanted to do something a little more simple and casual. To find a topic, I figured I would go diving back into the St. Elmo's Fire archives, and I went way back. Back to 2012, a simpler time, a time when YouTube still liked Alex Day, aka Naramon, and this was Maya's computer. I'm sorry. But I like the questions, they were things I haven't talked about, so here we go. The 2012 YouTube survey. I'm called Chris because Christopher takes too long to say. That's not a very interesting story. The more fun story is why I'm called Christopher. Here's the setting. Hospital room, I've just been born, they're filling out the paperwork. They look up and they say, "What would you like the name to be?" To which my dad replies, "Christopher." There's a pause in the room. The camera pans over to my grandmother who says, "Sean." It turns out that up until about the moment of my birth, I was going to be named Sean, and then my dad decided, you know what? I think I'm gonna name him after my friend Christopher instead. Christopher. Sean. Christopher. Sean. It's worth noting, by the way, that my mom had no input on this conversation whatsoever. The rest is history. Obviously, my dad won that argument. My grandma was really mad at him for a while, but got over it, and I was never called Sean again, although I was called Scott by no fewer than 3 separate people, which was kind of strange. I hate the favorites question. I'm so bad at coming up with favorites. I come up with all these criteria and I try to weigh them against each other and I can never come up with a favorite anything. But I think I can come up with a teacher that had the biggest impact on me, and that teacher was Mrs. Brigham, who we called Mrs. B because Mrs. Brigham took too long to say. And even though high school was more than a decade ago and she's since remarried, so she's literally no longer Mrs. B, it still seems weird to call her by her first name. Sorry, Jan. So I had Mrs. Brigham for at least a half a dozen English classes, which, so as someone who went on to become an English major, you can imagine why that may have had some influence on me. In fact, it was in one of those classes that I was introduced to Mila 18, which is one of my favorite books. Mrs. Brigham was also in charge of the school plays and forensics, both of which I was in, and especially for the school plays, I don't think I would have any kind of interest in performing if I hadn't done those. I don't think I'd be doing this if I hadn't had that experience on stage in front of people. And one thing that I will never forget about those school plays is that I was this quiet, timid little kid, and I didn't really have a sense of humor developed yet. Like, I was still kind of learning it. And yet for some reason I wanted to be in the school plays, I guess. But I remember being up on the auditorium in the stage for one of the rehearsals, and Mrs. Brigham was in the back, and she was just yelling at me because I would come up on stage and I would meekly deliver my line, and she'd go in the back and she'd be like, "I can't hear you!" And my face would turn like this color. And over time I learned to come out of my shell a little bit, to laugh at myself a little bit, and how to project my voice, which honestly is a skill you can turn on. It's incredibly useful to be able to walk into a room and just grab people's attention because they know they have to turn to you because they can hear you. Granted, I still don't speak up all that much, but it's nice to know that I have that ability if I need it. And if I hadn't been involved with writing and performance in high school, I don't know what kind of creative outlets I would have. Like, that's all I've ever really done outside of school/work. So yeah, I don't know what I would be like without that experience. This is kind of a bad question for me because I'm not an adventurous, foodie kind of person. I'm a really picky eater. There's a lot of things that I just don't eat that then keep me from eating other things that have those things in them. So I haven't had a lot of exotic foods, and I'm usually willing to at least try them, but then I tend not to like them, so I'm having a hard time remembering what things I've tried. The only kind of exotic thing I can come up with right now is a Japanese food called natto, which are fermented soybeans. I tried some when I was in Japan and I didn't know what they were, so I tasted it, and it was the worst tasting thing I had while I was there. The taste was bad, the texture was not just bad, but sticky, so even though you didn't like it, you couldn't quite spit it out, like it clung to your mouth. They smell weird and they taste weird, and even Japanese people are pretty divided on whether or not it's good or not. I think you just have to be raised on it to have any appreciation for it, and I was not, and I did not. The first rock concert that I ever went to was Leonard Skinner in 2003-ish? Obviously, not a lot of the original members. Still a really good show. We had pretty nice seats kind of far back, but you could still see the stage really well. Now I tend to be a lot closer to the stage where things are happening, but at the time it was, just kind of hung back and listened to the classic rock. Oh, what's another favorite question? I guess if I had to pick a favorite place, I would be okay with saying Kyoto, Japan, which oddly enough is where I tasted natto, and that was the one part of the experience I didn't enjoy. But Kyoto's a really cool city. Like, you'd be walking down the block next to this 6-story department store and you're around a corner, and then there's a 700-year-old temple just right next to it. You can exit your hotel on a city street, take a short walk up a hill, and suddenly you're in the middle of a bamboo forest with old shrines everywhere. It's just this really great mix of these old traditional structures next to new modern buildings, and they just sort of work together in a way that you wouldn't expect. But yeah, I think that's probably my answer, because if I could only revisit one place I'd ever been before, it would probably be that. Alright, St. Elmo's Fire, that is it for me. I'll see you later.